some of us drove 4 hours to be here. And if you can't do your job in 2 hours, you don't deserve any more time.
So we're going to finish the presentation. That's what we plan on doing. You need the information to formulate questions. That's what we came here to talk about tonight, was the information in the report. So I understand the frustration, but we're at 20 more minutes. You can do it. Hang in there.
So we're really going to step up here. We're going to finish off as quickly as possible, and we certainly agree. First of all, there was a question that I just want to clarify. These numbers, these 10 to the minus 5 numbers, are annual numbers. These are failure probability per year. The 1.6% probability is an accumulated probability over a 35-year period. So that was in respect to a few questions that I heard during the break. I'm going to be very fast here. With respect to, I've just finished talking about failure probability. I'm going to get into spill modeling. Our terms of reference required us to model what is termed a worst-case spill. As it turns out, a worst-case spill is a defined term under the Code of Federal Regulations. You need to account for the throughput. You need to account for the valving, the separation of the valves, and the elevation profile, and the response times. So in accordance with those defined terms, we calculated a worst-case spill. Essentially, what we're talking about here is a spill that's about 99% of the, it's bigger than 99% of spills that are existing in the PHMSA incident database. We based that in part on the equipment, the leak detection equipment, and so let's talk about leak detection equipment, and in particular the things that could potentially go wrong with leak detection equipment. The Achilles heel of liquids pipelines leak detection equipment is something called column separation, and column separation is depicted graphically here. What essentially happens is, coming off the high points of an elevation of a liquids pipeline, you can have a gap open up, you can have the pipeline go on vapor or on vacuum, and when that occurs, when that's prone to occur, it triggers an alarm on the leak detection system. And so when it's prone to occur, it can give rise to lengthy delays in diagnosing what the alarm is caused by. That's what happened on Marshall. This column separation is not feasible within the Straits of Mackinac, because the Straits of Mackinac are at the lowest elevation point of line 5, as it turns out. And so it's just something salient to bear in mind. So these are the outflow results that we modeled, ranging, depending upon hole size and rupture, hole size and location. They ranged from about 2,600 barrels to 4,500 barrels. And with that as an input parameter, then I'll turn this over to Dale, who will speak to oil spill behavior and impact modeling.
Right, so once we've kind of determined what some of these spill scenarios are, we're going to know where the oil goes. So we've modeled the fate and transport of these through a series of models, numerical hydrodynamic models, a 3D model of the entire lake system to derive currents and water levels, and a model for developing wave heights throughout the lake system, and an oil spill model that uses the information from the hydrodynamic model and the wave model to determine the transport fate and weathering of those materials. Inputs to these models are typically wind fields and pressure fields for deriving the currents, and a bathymetry. So we see the kind of conceptualized model of how we're doing this. The oil spill model is based on the Mike models, which is DHI used around the world. We basically have a number of data sources from NOAA and NCEP for inputs. We have ADCP, acoustic current data profilers, to compare our model ability against measurements out in the Great Lakes at a number of places to give us confidence that our model is actually driving those currents correctly. We run a number of, we actually run our hydrodynamics for a 1-year period, and then we put the spill into the model roughly about every 3 days during that year, run each spill scenario for 30 days to its end. And this is just showing an example of the bathymetry in our model mesh that we use in all 3 of the models covering the lake system. It is a little hard to see here, but it's based on triangular mesh grids in the computational engine. That's a zoom in around the Mackinac Strait. This is showing an input of the model, which is wind and pressure field. We're seeing the wind vectors and the pressure contours. These are every hour updating in the model, and on a grid spacing of about 20 kilometers. So zoom in of the currents that come out of the model. You can see the high concentration, high currents in the straits. And this is running continuously for a year, so we have a really good description of the currents that drive the transport of the oil. This is output from the wave model at one time step. You can kind of see for a wind out of the west, you have a large wave heights on the eastern shores of Lake Huron and so forth. So the zoom in of the wave fields, the high detail of waves we can get in the straits. And once we've entered all of those hydrodynamic parameters into our oil spill fate model, we run that model for a given scenario of whether it's a rupture or a puncture or whatnot. We run that model 120 times every 3 days so that we get the fate for each of those runs. We then amalgamate all those runs together to get a combined probability. And what you can see here is combining all the probabilities of all those runs into a single probability of the oil coverage. The extent is quite large for this scenario being the existing pipeline, the full rupture scenario. This is a zoom in of the same, and you can see the higher probabilities close to the source, which is basically at the center of the pipe, or the deeper part of the pipeline. This picture showing where the oil actually grounds itself for one of the scenarios, for the combination of 120 simulations for one of the scenarios. And this shows the time that it takes for the oil to arrive at certain locations. So we have all these tools that can then be fed into predicting the impacts, whether it's habitat or just cleanup or things like that. This is showing a combination. It's a little hard to see, but with a spill on the north shore of the pipeline area versus the south shore of the pipeline area. The North Shore discharges 2,900 barrels versus the South Shore's 4,500 barrels. And I don't know if you can actually see the kind of coloration along the shoreline shows where the oil gets to, and it's fairly similar for both cases, even though it's roughly 2 times the leakage for the South Shore case, just basically because it rides the current. And no matter how much oil you put in, it basically rides the current to the same extents, but maybe at a higher concentration. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nassim.
Well, I'm just going to very quickly talk about the NGL modeling. So as it was mentioned before, about 1/6 of times there's natural gas liquid being transported through the Straits of Mackinac. And with the NGLs, if you have a failure, the main concern is the safety concern. The reason being, most of these NGLs are they're propane, and they will be evaporating once released. So the main concern is the safety. So what we did for these ones, we used similar release sizes as was used in the oil phase, and similar failure mechanism. We use a CFD computational fluid dynamics software called Parker to model the release volume, release rate, sorry. And using those release rates, we then took those and modeled them for dispersion modeling. But because the depth of the channel varies along the straits, we did that for 5 different scenarios, so we get understanding of different release rates. Then we use that for the full bore rupture and the leak scenarios. The full bore ruptures, the figures actually are up there. You can see the impact area. The full bore rupture is clear on the left. The reason that's focused on mainly on the deeper sections are those are associated with failure mechanisms, spanning and anchor hooking, which would happen along the deeper section of the straits. The leak, however, would be associated with the incorrect operation, which could happen anywhere along the strait. So we've modeled that along the entire crossing. I'm just going to pass it to Jack to talk about the spill cost.
I'm going to pass over the slides with text. The spill cost model was used to estimate the cost, so I'm just going to spend a moment on this one, which is just to remind you that the model was tuned and calibrated to Michigan conditions by looking at general costs within Michigan, and it also was calibrated to replicate the Marshall spill cost by taking all of the inputs from that, and it generated the cost just under $1 billion, and the actual costs that are recorded on the books of Enbridge are about $1.2 billion. So that gave us some confidence in the model. To get to the model, it used some of the inputs which you've been already discussed in terms of the ruptures. The two crossings here that we were considering, the existing crossing and the trenched crossing, alternative 5, the maximum economic costs or damages or consequences from that spill were from the south side spill. In all of those 120 cases, Sheboygan, Emmett, and Mackinac counties received the brunt of the impacts, and that's reflected in that. What I wanted to stress in these cases was that one of the inputs to the model, which reflects Michigan land use along the coast, in fact, is the actual number of miles of shoreline oiling, which was derived from the FATES model that was just described. And a typical oiling from an existing crossing was 20 miles, and from the trench crossing was of the order of, let's say, 25 miles. In both of these cases, 95% of the spills involved 60 miles or less of shoreline oiling. So that's pretty much the credible worst case spill was what we call a 95 percentile spill. Was somewhere just under 60 miles of shoreline oiling. To get to the actual spill cost results, this table you'll find in the report. I'm just going to highlight a few numbers in that. These capture the 20 spills that were modeled and costed into high consequence areas, into non-high consequence areas, with ice, without ice. For the pipeline, for the southern pipeline and the rail models, we can see results. I can't. Thank you. It's 112 and 21 million dollars. But so those were the order of spill costs for those releases for the pipeline and the rail. Of interest here, I think, given that we're focusing a lot on the straits, those two scenarios for the southern shore costs generated what we call an expected cost at the mean shoreline oiling at the mean levels of about $146 million for a south shore leak of about 4,500 barrels and about $237 million for a south shore leak from the new trench crossing, which has a release of about 9,800 barrels. At the 95th percentile, which means at the edges close to the 60 miles of oiling from the south shore leak on the existing line, it's about 200 million. From the south shore leak on a trench crossing, it's higher than that because there's more deposition of oil. It would cost about $310 million to clean up and cover the environmental damage costs. I just want to underline that these are bottom line total numbers that include both cleanup and environmental damages for restoration. And typically that's adequate to cover the losses from anything that relies on the environment, including water supplies, subsistence uses, and so forth. So those are the bottom lines for the spill cost results. Those were combined with the probabilities into various indices, and these are both tables that I'm going to show you that are in the executive summaries and in the various summaries, and it lets us do the comparison across all the alternatives. The highlighted area at the bottom generates the comparative results of the economic, the safety, and the environmental consequences combined with the probabilities. The risk summary in the report is presented compared to the base case, which is just by definition a value of 1. So where it says times the base, these are the summary statistics and results from the report of the different alternatives compared to the base case. Finally, a quick overview of the market impacts. I'm going to jump straight into this picture because our market is basically Michigan. We looked at Rapid River propane. There's about 2,000 barrels a day of propane being consumed through the Rapid River facility. There's about 10,000 barrels a day of crude oil injected into Line 5 at Lewiston, and the refineries at Detroit and Toledo are receiving crude through Line 5 and through other parts of the Lakehead system. We modeled all of these in different local markets for the Rapid River and the Lewiston, as well as the impact on the refineries. Those models, again, are described in the report, and I won't go through the models. I'll just go through the bottom line. And we considered the pipeline flows. First of all, for the Straits crossings, the alternative 4, there were no change to the market impacts because propane could still go to the Upper Peninsula, crude could still be injected, and the final impact was something like about a penny a barrel, less than that. So negligible. The results for consumers of propane, you will see we conclude it's between 10 cents a gallon and 35 cents a gallon, depending on how it gets to them. It's using existing systems such as trucks. The local impacts for the Lower Peninsula crude oil, again, we look at the backstop existing system of trucks, and that gets us an impact of about $2.40 a barrel that suppliers will have to pay. Finally, to consumers, which is everybody that lives in Michigan, and you're consuming about 5.7 billion gallons a year of gasoline and other refined petroleum products. The hit on that from abandoning the current configuration, which is basically using the line pipe crossing. The results you will see in the report say that if you abandon this line, there's an impact of about 2 cents a gallon, just over 2 cents a gallon. And that's it, because now I've got the next slide which says questions.
Right, yeah.
Okay, Tracy's on that side of the room. I'm going to take this side of the room, a couple of things. The report that you just saw will be up online on the Pipeline Safety Board webpage. You can check it out there. The full report, draft report, will be up on the website also. The purpose now is to get your questions related to the report. I ask that you kind of try and keep the questions related to the report as much as possible. If we get duplicate questions, Tracy and I will try and weed through them. Raise your hand. We're going to try and line you up as much as we can to get going. All right, I'll start right with you. Do you want to read it?
Yeah.
So, when you looked at the spill analysis, how did you factor for a spill occurring when there's multiple feet of ice coverage at the Straits of Mackinac? Could you? So, how did we account for ice cover?
Yeah, because if a spill happens when there's ice cover, then obviously the cleanup, that you spoke about what the cleanup costs were going to be.
Right.
But that's based on an assumption of that happening immediately as opposed to leaving it for a period of time.
Right.
So you were talking about up to 60 miles of degradation on the shorelines with the oil. But if that occurs when there's ice coverage, then surely that's a completely different scenario.
That's correct. In the cases of ice cover, which was in the winter season, of course, first of all, not all of the spills showed ice cover. The southern spills showed no ice cover. It was the rupture and the northern spills which showed ice cover, and typically it was between 17 and 19 out of the 120 spills in the set. So we incorporated that. We did a separate estimate for the costs and the environmental damages, given that there was no shoreline oiling during those spills. That's what the model showed after 30 days still, and that was taken into account in the spill costs. And then in the end, they were probability weighted in the final risk analysis.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Please bear with me, my question is about 27 seconds long. The analysis appears neutral, factual, scientific, with all things being equal and static. I thank you for that. You're not the enemy. However, there are risk factors that the analysis did not identify or take into consideration when drawing up feasibility and cost risk conclusions, and those risks are the persistent and consistent negative characteristics of the principal entity, Enbridge, which had led to a known decades-long history of negligence in maintenance and repair, leading to multiple and serious permit violations, which include pipeline wall thickness, minimum curvature requirements, maximum unsupported span provisions, oil spill response plans, Environmental Protection Act, standards of care as a reasonably prudent person, and violations of indemnity provisions. Why were these known risk factors omitted from the analysis?
So I guess I can weigh in on that very briefly. The scope of our analysis was confined to the Straits crossing, the installation, the information that pertained to the Straits crossing, including inline inspection data, the operational logs, the cathodic protection information, everything else associated with the operation and design and installation of that Straits crossing. So we really, we were tasked with being independent, and engineering analysis is really just looking at all of the facts that are presented for you to review. We looked at all relevant facts that pertain to failure probability and consequence assessment. And so we included operational risk as one of the factors that give rise to failure. That was certainly one of the things that contributes to total failure probability.
Regarding the weathering of oil in the report, on page 155 it says, quote, "The overall processes are, for the most part, similar for freshwater and marine water as they generally pertain to oil properties in terms of chemistry and composition." This has no citation. And given that it's known that dispersants act differently on oil and freshwater than in saltwater, on what basis is this claim and similar claims made about marine versus freshwater?
What's the page number at the bottom right?
155.
155. He's going to look up there.
So just bear with us, we're just looking that up.
PDF page number one. On the bottom. We need the page number 2-3- or whatever to find it.
You may be referencing PDF page. Is there a page at
That's
the...
all I got access to.
Teresa, do we want to give them some time to look this up? And would that be
With
okay
that-
now if we took the next question while you
Okay,
guys?
so they're gonna spend some time in that. We'll move to the next question.
Okay, I have a question then.
Hi, thank you for the question. So we found that at least 2 of the panelists have ties to the oil industry. Can someone explain to me how to be considered a completely unbiased and independent analysis with that being the case?
Where's the question?
So the question gets to conflict of interest. We talked about this. So we talked about this on the Chippewa contractor on the risk analysis plan. So if any of the panelists want to talk about how that was vetted through the request for proposal process, or Matt, if anyone from the project team wants to speak to it.
Sure, Bill. Thank you, Bill. I think there's really a couple elements to that. The first is the team. The second is how we interacted with Enbridge during the course of the project and how we interacted with the state. In terms of the project team, we've honored all of our agreements, and nobody on this panel on the project team worked on Line 5 Enbridge. Secondly, in the carrying out of the project, Bill,
I guess I'm just going to go over how we got information for the study. We originally, when we set out to do the study, we did a gap analysis of what was publicly available versus what we could obtain either through the state or through the Enbridge website. After we did that gap analysis, what we did was went through a protocol that was prescribed by the state, essentially, which was that we were to interact only with Enbridge to obtain data and through a written process. So what we did was, over the process of the last, I guess, 11 months, we issued a number of information requests to Enbridge directly, and that was about 72 information requests based on what the needs were of the project to do the analysis. And that process sort of happened essentially throughout the 11 months as we went through the different phases of the project. We needed different types of data. And also any data that we couldn't get, I guess we also talked to the state as well
Things like the vessel information or Mark through D&B got us some of the environmental data as well. And we had essentially about 25 meetings with the state to talk about progress and also data.
Guys, real quick, if I could just clarify the question. I think it got less to how information was gathered for the report and more to do with the experience and past work history of the team members. So obviously, the kind of experience you guys have to do the job you do means that you've worked in the oil industry before. So if you could talk a little bit about how you balance that previous work history or interests with the task you had in front of you.
Yeah, so just to address that question, that in our proposal we outlined a lot of the experience, and as you can tell from the presentation today, it takes a lot of domain expertise regarding the industry, and as such, this panel has worked for all pipeline operators out there, including Enbridge. That's a fact. That said, that's actually how the domain expertise gets into the analysis that's presented here. And how do we carry that through is one is, in doing the analyses and how we've executed this project, we've gone at great lengths to full transparency to document everything that we've done, what data has been relied upon, what analyses have been performed, and what those results mean.
We were able to find the page reference. It's 2-86.
Thank you.
The comment it's in the table talks about that the difference between
it's in text.
Yeah.
Can this be sharpened so we could actually read it? It's out of focus.
Anyway, it's referenced in the table on the previous page and in the text, and what it says in the table is the difference really is due to differences in assumed mixing between freshwater environments and saltwater environments, meaning that saltwater environments are where you have large ocean waves that are persisting for long periods of times that are extreme mixing events, compared to most of the time in freshwater environments. The wave action is there, but it's less dynamic, not as strong, so that mixing potential is lessened. Not that it's not there, and it's not saying that it's not being considered in the model. It is. So.
It says it's in terms of chemistry and composition, not wave action.
So that's probably a good question to note in the report and come back with an answer either at a later time or reference it back when we get.
Actually, can you be sure to capture that card because I'm not sure.
Yeah, I did. We have it. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
I actually have a multi-part question. My name is Roger Grothier, and I live in the Straits of Mackinac, so it's a very direct impact, and I've been involved with the Corps of Engineers and other studies dealing with hydrodynamic modeling. So I got a multi-part question. The first one is an anchor drag in the Straits would effectively take out both 20-inch lines, releasing 60,000 barrels of crude, and I have a hard time rationalizing how you, and I asked for some clarification of how you can come up with a worst case of 4,500 barrels. The second question is dealing with the Mike model and whether or not the Mike model has been calibrated to observations more than 1 or 2 years in length with information about the diversity of the flows that go forward. And my third question, and the most important one, is dealing with the consequences. This is the $100 million to $200 million price tag that you put on the base case, and I cannot understand how you can quantify that to only 20 miles of shoreline oil, when on your maps you were showing all of Sheboygan County, which is 42 miles, Mackinac County, which is about 35 miles in length, Now, there's inconsistencies in this logic, and I know you're going to handle it by probability distributions, but you got to need to come up and justify those 3 points. Whether or not the worst case is valid, the second point, whether or not the fate in transport is realistic, and the third point, the consequences of the economic implications to 3 counties alone is going to be more than $200 million. So I just cannot understand how you have lied with those numbers.
So there are a few questions, and it may take us a while to get to them all. So we'll try to get to them in the order in which I heard them. The first one was pertaining to anchor drag, and these pipelines are separated by, I think it's 1,300 feet, the west pipeline and the east pipeline. And the question is, why not 2 pipelines? Why wouldn't 2 pipelines be taken out rather than 1? We employed an approach that was based on an industry recommended guidance document. And that document goes into some argument to talk about that, about what happens when you hook one pipeline. And it goes through some discussion describing that it changes the navigation characteristics of the vessel, it quickly alerts the operator, the pilot to what's going on, and that it's a reasonable scenario that they can take preventative actions very quickly at that point. So we basically just followed the guidance document in respect of that. With respect to the outflow volumes, and I alluded to it fairly briefly when we had a few slides up with respect to outflow volumes. And we were tasked with modeling outflow volumes that were characterized as worst case outflow volumes. That's a defined term under the Code of Federal Regulations. And if you are going to model worst case outflow volumes, there are certain things that you need to take account of, and they prescribe those things that you need to take account of. The things that you need to take account of are the flow rates of the throughput of the pipeline, the valve configuration, the leak detection system, the elevation profile between the isolation valves. Very briefly, we looked at the performance standards associated with leak detection systems that are in place at both the north and south valve sites to the Straits crossing. There are leak detection systems dedicated just for the Straits crossings and 3 independent leak detection systems. And collectively, they have certain performance standards which lead, those performance standards dictate that under certain circumstances that the equipment should detect that a release has occurred and initiate a complete shutdown and isolation within a certain time frame. And as everybody, I think, in this room knows, that sometimes things don't work according to plan. Sometimes the performance standards for equipment get exceeded, and for various reasons. We took the performance standards, the valve closure times for the equipment based on the leak detection systems in place. We took those isolation times and multiplied them by 4. And then we looked at, okay, what in addition to that can go wrong? And most specifically, what is fixed and foremost, fixed and of greatest concern to most people is the incident that that occurred here in Michigan in 2010, the Marshall incident. And in that incident, let me talk a little bit about what happened in that incident. That was a pipeline in which there was a big rupture of the pipeline caused by near neutral pH stress corrosion cracking. The pipeline operator, Enbridge, did not recognize that a rupture had occurred for 17 hours. And during that time frame, that 17-hour time frame, they in fact tried to restart the pipeline several times. And it led to what is characterized as the costliest onshore oil spill in U.S. history. If you go through the incident report as to what gave rise to these sequences of errors that were associated with failing to recognize that a leak had occurred, that a rupture had occurred, and failure to quickly isolate that rupture. It points to what I briefly characterized in my presentation as the Achilles heel of leak detection systems and liquids pipeline systems. That is column separation. When column separation occurs, it triggers an alarm. And column separation is prone to occur during upset conditions such as startup and shutdown. And when you expect that you're going to get an alarm, and you do get an alarm, you tend to disregard it. And that's, I think, what happened there. An alarm went, they said, oh, it's just column separation.
For 17 hours?
Yes, yes. I'm not here. Look, let's make it clear. We do not work for Enbridge. We don't represent Enbridge. We're not here to characterize this pipeline system as good or bad or anything. We're just here to talk about the facts. And that incident, the column separation incident, which is mentioned, by the way, 86 times in the Marshall Incident Report, is the thing that gave rise to the misdiagnosis and prompt response in that case. Where column separation is prone to occur, you need to have systems and practices in place that can deal with that and discriminate between a column separation event and an actual leak. In 2010, those systems and practices were not in place on line 6B to the extent that they could effectively discriminate between a leak and a column separation event that occurred. So that, more than anything, is again the Achilles heel of leak detection systems in liquids pipelines. If you are dealing with a section of pipeline in which column separation cannot occur, that is that's a very significant fact. And this is a section of pipeline that column separation cannot occur. It's in fact the lowest elevation segment in the entire of line 5. The rules of physics dictate that column separation will not occur here. So any alarm that gets triggered in this segment cannot be confused with a column separation event and therefore be misdiagnosed. That's a consideration in all of this. But one of the things I need to point out is the leak volumes that we modeled were more than 99% of the volumes in the Department of Transport incident database that we referenced. So these are not insignificant leak volumes that we modeled. They met the requirements of what we were given to do. They are defined as a worst-case spill volume based on prescriptive guidelines within the Code of Federal Regulations that describe how you model a worst-case spill. Now, there are other questions, and
I'm going to take the third question before passing it on to my colleague. The third question had to do with the consequences of oiling across the shorelines of Chippewa, Emmett, and Mackinac, and how that's reconciled with some of the maps which apparently show extensive oiling. The calculation was that the calculation of 100 to 200 million is based on a single spill, and as I described previously, it could be a mean spill or a 95 percentile spill. So let's just look at the 95 percentile spill, which oiled about 57 miles of the shoreline. That's one spill. That's what we're concerned with, one spill. The other maps that show all of the oiling around the entire zone, it's what we call the zone of exposure. The zone of exposure is a consolidated combination of 120 spills. Some spills head east, some spills head west, some spills sort of slosh around, some spills go north. They go in different directions. So when you add all those 120 spills up, it shows that this entire area around the Mackinac Straits could potentially have exposure to a spill from line 5. But not 120 spills are going to happen at once. Only one spill happens at once, and that is what we are doing our evaluation of. So although hundreds of miles of shoreline are potentially exposed to a spill, a single spill from the model shows on average about 20 miles of oiling and up to realistically about 60 miles of exposure. And the maps that are shown in the report will all say whether it's a single spill or 120 spills. With that, I'd like to pass on to the second part of that.
I remember part of it. I think it had to do with the hydrodynamic modeling, if I recall. Yes, the Mike model validation. There is an appendix to the report that describes the hydrodynamic modeling. It's not so much in the main report, but you can go in and see we've calibrated, validated against 4 different measurement periods, I believe. Mostly currents, because currents are the most important part in establishing what the oil spill transport is going to be. Additionally to what's reported, we also had access to NOAA's 3D model results, and we did do comparisons to that model, and typically we compared very well. We generally predicted slightly higher currents than the NOAA model at the bottom, and I believe also on the surface. That would indicate, at least we're, compared to NOAA, we're a little bit conservative in predicting the distance of transport of the model.
Teresa, can I just clarify? Because I think the end of that question got to whether or not you considered more than a year's worth. Is that accurate? You were wondering what the data set was, right? I mean, did they only consider a year's worth of current, or can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, you have to balance that a little bit between what you have and where your different data sources overlap and what's available. We tried our best actually to do that. They are 4 different periods of time ranging from periods in 2015, 1990, 2016, and 2015. Generally when the ADCP measurements were available from the sources that were provided to us.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
Tom Gale from the Michigan Sierra Club Legislative Committee. I'm looking at your principal threats, your secondary threats. Incorrect operations is one of the principal threats. Yeah, a minute ago you commented on the fact that these things can't happen in this particular scenario, and thus you gave no weight to incorrect operations, which concerns me to some degree. Okay. Just to preface a little bit. One of the other principal threats that I do not see listed here that has been discussed openly that you should be aware of in this time and place are the threats of national security. That lake is not very deep. Hard hat divers in the Gulf can go 660 feet. This is nowhere near that. You could anchor a boat very close to that location, easily drop a team down, and certainly take care of a complete breach pretty handily. Those alarms and systems in place could also easily be overtaken and overridden, so that the stopgap would not continue. Now, I'm not an expert on this particular section of pipe, okay? But I can see that you have obviously given lots of thought to the principal threat of perhaps something happening here today by the number of security in place per capita for this size group. Yet no weight given to that issue for a pipeline that carries millions of gallons of oil under our straits. Okay? No probability to that. Now, so my question to you is, in a location where we have 20% of the world's fresh water, and in a world where we have a lot of things happening in the part of the world that has no water, how can you give no weight whatsoever to that issue?
Thanks. There are a few questions, and I've written them down, and I'll get to them in turn. The first one you started out with is you highlighted the fact that we did consider the threat of incorrect operations, and yet that seems to be inconsistent with what I just was talking about with respect to column separation. Is that fair? Is that the inconsistency?
Oh, I heard the discussion about the column separation that cannot occur in that particular region, which means the operator who is looking at the alarm couldn't distinguish, assuming that operator is still able to look at that and react to that. Which, if it was a coordinated attack, of course, they would have taken that into account, and that,
So to be clear, isolation and response is a little bit like closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. The thing that you're trying to prevent is the leak in the first place. In the case of the Marshall incident, the cause of the leak is characterized as environmental cracking. That's the thing that caused the rupture in Marshall.
Age of the 41-year-old pipeline.
And
really still?
There are a variety of things that gave rise to that particular failure. And I don't consider myself, I didn't do the failure investigation on the Marshall incident, so I don't want to get into what would probably be a lot of speculation on my part. But nevertheless, you have to distinguish between cause of failure, the original cause of the release of oil, and the ability to respond to that. There were problems, and I've said it before, that the system was not properly capable of discriminating between a column separation event and an actual release. That is not the cause of failure. And it doesn't mean that we are, by saying that column separation does not occur in the straits, is not to say that the cause of failure cannot be incorrect operations. It can. So I just want to make sure that we discriminate between these two things. One is a cause of failure, the other one is a response to that failure, and they're two separate things. The second factor you brought up was the prospect of sabotage. And I started out by talking about the industry standard guidance documents for threat assessment, and they characterize 12 different threat categories, and they're based on industry incident data. Over the course of many years, there's been thousands of leaks of various sizes in oil and liquids pipelines. And while sabotage is a potential cause of failure, compared to the principal threats that we identified, based on the incident database that shows how often this is prone to occur, it is orders of magnitude below the threats that we need to be worried about. To be really clear, I mean, I get the sense that people feel that we might be trying to lowball or put sugar on the risk assessment.
Yep.
That is, if that's what you truly feel, then I would say that we're probably not doing a very good job of it, because you need to look at what we've been telling you tonight and what was reported in the report. And what we're talking about are very significant consequences. For starters, if you get a big release of oil in the straits, We are not trying to tell you that it's inconsequential. It is a very significant, very serious event. So that's for starters. This is what we're telling you. The other thing that we're telling you is, if you're paying attention, we're not trying to tell you that the probability of that event is 0 or close to 0. All right? So that's why I'm saying, if you're trying to suggest that we're trying to sugarcoat the risk analysis for the existing infrastructure, we've done a very poor job of sugarcoating it, in my estimation. I think, sabotage, getting back to your concern about sabotage, it is a potential threat, but compared to the significant threats that dominate the threat potential at this location, it is orders of magnitude below the level of the principal threats.
Okay, I have a written question. Could you describe what it is meant by the phrase time-dependent doesn't represent a significant factor in failure probability? Does this assume the age of the pipeline doesn't really matter if it's probability of failure? Is that correct?
There are time-dependent mechanisms that are caused by degradation systems such as corrosion, stress corrosion cracking, other forms of environmental cracking, internal corrosion. Those are not the predominant causes of failure here. The predominant causes of failure here are those that are related to the design and installation of the pipeline. You could literally take a brand new pipeline, install it tomorrow, lay it on the bottom of the lake bed the way it is currently, and it's not going to materially affect the probability of failure. The probability of failure is dominated by those things that are related to design, and specifically the most significant concern is its presence on the bottom of the lake bed beneath a busy shipping channel. So those aren't related to age. The evidence that we have available to us suggests that, contrary to the supposition that this pipeline might be rusting at the bottom of the lake, there's no evidence of that. We have very good, reliable evidence in the form of inline inspection data. The proof is in the pudding. If corrosion is going on, we would see it in the magnetic flux leakage data. They show up as volumetric wall loss data, and we would furthermore not only see it in the most recent inline inspection run, we would see that those defects are growing over time, because since 1998, MFL tools have been run through this pipeline every 5 years. So if corrosion was going on, then metal loss would appear in 1998 as relatively small in size. The next 5 years it would be somewhat bigger. The next 5 years would be bigger yet. That's the sort of trend you would expect to see from actual ongoing corrosion. It's not what we're seeing.
Okay, I'm just a simple guy, so I'm going to speak English. And I would appreciate it if you would not speak engineer back, okay? What's the depth of the Mackinac Straits?
260 feet.
Okay. The normal draft of a tanker or an ore carrier that's going to go through there? 40 feet maybe?
Yeah, it depends on whether it's loaded or...
Okay. In the state, in the Great Lakes states, the incident that you are bringing up as the highest level of threat to the potential damage to Line 5 is an anchor dropping and dragging on the bottom of that strait. How many incidents of anchors just going willy-nilly off of one of these tankers or whatever, the ore carriers, how many occurrences of that have occurred in the Great Lakes? Did you have any data on that?
Yeah, it's not something, there's not a lot of pipelines beneath the Great Lakes.
No, you're missing my point. My point is, how many times has an anchor dropped off of one of these boats and just dragged on the bottom for any particular amount of time? Has that occurred? Do you have data to that?
We don't have data on that. The data, or the approach that we have was based on data that was gathered in the North Sea, actually, at but because it speaks to normal shipping practice, it's transportable to wherever you have cargo vessels.
Okay, I understand that if an anchor off of one of these, I don't want to say super tanker, but that's not what it is, but off of one of these ore carriers or whatever, if one of those things drop and hit that line, yeah, you're damn sure gonna screw up that pipeline, okay? Now that being said, you have a hole in the side of that pipeline and it's busted open. The sensor on the North Shore is going to pick that up because there's going to be an immediate drop in pressure. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's the way the system is designed.
That's the way the system is designed. How fast of a response? Is it an automatic shut-off that occurs?
Yes, on pressure drop of that nature, it would trigger an immediate valve closure at both the north and south valve sites. Now, the valves take a while to close. They take about 3 minutes to fully close.
Okay, but 3 minutes, okay, I can understand it taking 3 minutes. One end to the other. So now you've got 5 miles of oil in a 20-inch pipeline. So I would assume you figured out the volume.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you get that oil other than letting it spill out? Is there a way to evacuate that oil either out of the south or out of the north?
What you would probably do is oil is lighter than water, of course, and so if it depends on where this break occurs. If it breaks at the deepest part of the channel, then the oil, because it's lighter than water, doesn't slide down the pipeline and out the end of the pipe. It tends to stay trapped within the pipe. It's those breaks that occur at higher elevation locations that result in drain up and out of the oil. We've considered all those different locations through the profile though. But nevertheless, about the trapped oil that's left in that pipe, I think what you would probably do is, if you were the operator, is that you would start drawing oil from both sides simultaneously until you started drawing lake water.
Okay. One last quick comment, and then I'll sit down, because just question, comment, however you want to put it. Terrorism by its very nature is obscure and minimal worldwide. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, so to speak. So to not factor in even that minimal amount of possibility, like the gentleman said, we got 20% of the fresh water on the planet. You know, if you screw it up, just based on Enbridge's word on their data of their machines going through, who's checking Enbridge and their data? You see what I'm saying?
So I think the last question there was just about the integrity of the integrity testing. You know, if you could.
Okay, so and also the data, right? Because we're relying on Enbridge. We submit information requests to Enbridge, and we're relying on getting that information from Enbridge. Is that?
I heard that, but my point is, how do you know they're giving you the facts? I mean, Donald Trump said he won the election, right? Well, there's 3 million people that will tell us different.
Well, okay, fair question.
Of the information has to, the source of it has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Back to my question.
So if you want to just speak.
So with respect to data, one of the, you can't 100% validate all the information you get. It's just impossible to do that. However, some of the data that we have asked for and have gotten, in fact, it's the most important information, is the inline inspection data, and there's a lot of it. And when we get that data, it doesn't have Enbridge's logo at the top of the report. It has the inspection company, it has Baker Hughes or Oceaneering or NDT. They are the people who are tasked with inspecting pipeline operators' infrastructure. And they provide reports. They are not in the business of fabricating or falsifying records. As far as I know, I can't imagine that happening. I can't imagine why any of those companies would go in and take it upon themselves to falsify inspection records.
You need to read about Hiawatha National Forest in Enbridge is still up there, okay? Check it online and tell us about Enbridge not being, transparent with whatever.
So guys, we have to ask that, if you've already asked a question, that we respect the questions that are being asked and we kind of do one at a time here and give the panel the opportunity to answer.
Hi, I'm Dave Schwab from University of Michigan, and I've done some work on hydrodynamic modeling in the Straits. I really have to compliment you guys, Jim and the whole crew, on adding to the ammunition that the state has to shut down the pipeline. You guys have really done a good job. You didn't candy coat it. I think you could have been actually a lot worse. One thing I did in my study was look at spills occurring every 6 hours in time, because as you know from the work you did, that the currents change so quick that if you want to catch the absolute worst case, you really should do it more frequently, release spills more frequently than once every 3 days. I don't know what your constraints were, but if you did that, you'd get even worse results than what we had. They're bad, not what we had. The other thing I noticed is that you based your estimate of spill cost on the 95th percentile worst case. I did mine on worst cases. So I guess my question is, given those facts, do you think that your estimate of cost for the worst cases probably a little low?
I've just been told to give it a sec. I think that's the second. Thank you. The calculation of the worst case at the 95 percentile was calculated based on the technical worst case, if you will, outflow from the North Shore on the South Shore, because it had the highest elevation and the highest possibility of drainage. So the spill was approximately just under 5,000 barrels, or just over 4,500 barrels. So that is the basis for one part of the calculation. The other part of the calculation is the actual amount of oiling, if you will, along the coastline, which is a function of the hydrodynamic model, yes, and then interpretation. I did look at the 120th case within that, and it was, in each of these spills, they were under 100 miles. So the 95th percentile, within the context of the spill set, which was 120 spills, it meant that 6 spills were somewhere between the 60 and 80 miles, in fact, within that, and that's along the South Shore. So that's 6 spills out of 120, and there's actually 6 spills out of 360. So in effect, these were sort of the 98th percentile, or if you will. If I went to 100 within our information set, that brought us to about 80 miles, and that would not have materially increased the spill cost by that much at that point, because it keeps, as I think we mentioned, and I'm sure you realize that as the volumes get larger, there's just a lot more deposition within the same place. That's what ours showed, and that's typically what happens with land-based spills or marine spills. Because of currents and whatever action, it does tend to collect in the same place, but simply more of it. So the economics of spill cleanup actually start to benefit a bit perversely from economies of scale at that point, because you're there and you're picking up more material. The economics of damage costs Similarly, once a spill hits an area and there are sensitive organisms there and they reach a certain threshold, then those sensitive organisms are permanently damaged. And if more material lands on them, it will cost you more to clean it up, but it will not necessarily do more environmental damage because, in blunt terms, it's already dead. And this is what happens with these particular areas. $200 million for a light oil spill is a very large number, in my professional opinion. It is a tremendous amount of damage, in fact. And if you decompose that into cleanup and environmental damage, you will see that more than one half of that is in terms of environmental damages, and these are significant numbers.
My name is Gabe Menendekman. I'm here with Food and Water Watch, and I just had a question about your projections for what would happen keeping Line 5 open. So your study reports the likelihood of failure in the next 25 years is 1.6%, or about 1/60. So I'm wondering how you explain the discrepancy between this and the fact that 30 spills have occurred in the past 50 years on Line 5. I'm wondering if I'm unclear on your definition of failure, or, yeah.
Okay, so Line 5 in its totality is, what, how many miles? 650 miles. You've had how many spills? 30 spills over the last how long? 30 spills over the past 50 years for about 640 miles of pipeline. We're talking about a 1 in 60 chance of having a spill over around 4 miles of pipeline. So with linear infrastructure, probability of failure is proportional, among other things, to the length of that infrastructure. So we're only talking about a very, very small portion of that infrastructure. I don't know if I want to elaborate even more than that, but that's essentially what the basis of that is.
Did that answer the question?
Did I not answer the question?
I thought he was asking what was considered failure and what wasn't. Maybe I misunderstood.
Okay, I may have misinterpreted the question. If you want to rephrase the question?
Did you want to clarify your question, or did that get you?
So are you saying that looking at statistics for all of Line 5 is not what you did? You were looking at specific points and that's it, basically?
We were focused on the straits.
Okay, so the 1/60
is for the straits. That's for the straits. Only the straits.
Where did the 1/60 come from? Because your panel said 1.6 times 10 to the -5.
Right, okay. So the numbers that were projected on the charts, and I looked at the chart and I realized it wasn't very clear. Those were annual numbers. That's a probability of failure per year of operation for the straits crossing. Now, you can accumulate that probability of failure over a longer period of time, which is what I did. We accumulated it between now and the year 2053, which is a roughly 35-year period of time. It's a cumulative probability. The 1.6% represents cumulative over 35 years. And fair enough, I looked at the chart and I can certainly see how there would be confusion because the chart didn't clearly identify that we were talking about annual probabilities for those 10 to the -5 numbers and -4 numbers.
Hi, my name is Terry Wilkerson, and I have a point of clarification and a question. In your scenarios, your 120 scenarios, what time amount were you using for shutdown? We know best case is 3 minutes. What was the assumption you were making in those 120 scenarios?
It's on the slide.
So someone can look that up while I ask my question, because I didn't hear that. So I was at a safety session in Stockbridge, and Enbridge officials mentioned that their investment in wind and solar power. Why is wind and solar power not in your analysis of alternatives?
Okay, so unfortunately, this was the slide where I was trying to do quickly. So there are two different sizes of openings. One is a 3-inch hole that's considered, the other one is a full bore rupture, a full diameter opening. For the full diameter opening, the performance standard is that it should be closed within 3 minutes. That's the equipment. The equipment performance standards dictates that upon a significant opening, such as a full bore rupture or a large leak, there will be a pressure drop which will trigger the valve closures at either end of the straits. And those valves will be fully closed within 3 minutes. We use 13.5 minutes for isolation. For the 3-inch hole, the equipment dictates it should be closed within 8 minutes. We use 33.5 minutes. So roughly a little more than 4 times performance standards of the equipment.
And then my question was about why wind and solar weren't included in your alternative analysis?
Why wind and solar?
As options for delivering energy?
Right. It wasn't included in the scope of work. It wasn't something that was asked of us. Wind and solar was not something that we were asked to investigate. We really just responded to the scope of work that was defined and put in front of us.
Okay, we have a question up here.
As near as I can tell from what I just checked today, Michigan does not run a hazardous liquid pipeline safety program at the present time under agreement with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. I guess the question that I have is, what is the context for what Michigan is able to deal with the safety issue when they don't run a safety program? In other words, in all of the explorations that you have taken on this pipeline, did you discover any evidence anywhere from any party that is evidence of a federal law violation for the maintenance of pipeline integrity and the issue of spill response and remediation? Those are two different questions, both for pipeline integrity and spill response and remediation. And what exactly is the context for Michigan engaging in safety regulation of this pipeline? And what can actually be enforced as a Michigan requirement that's a safety requirement as opposed to a federal requirement?
So if I could, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, okay? To put it in context of the alternatives analysis, which is really what our panel, I understand, but that's what our panel can speak to tonight, right? This question and answer session is specifically about the research that they did. But I think that there's an important link, right? Is there anything in the risk analysis that you performed that would speak to the worst case scenario or the cost of the spill given the different regulatory schemes that are out there? Because again, this session focuses just on the work that they did and not necessarily what the regulatory environment is overall for pipelines.
I would like to know, has Enbridge violated any federal laws or regulations on pipeline integrity from what you've seen that should be noted, should be told to the public, that deals with the risk of this pipeline and the risk of the spills of the pipeline?
We did look at things that pertain to the Straits crossing. Our focus really was on the Straits crossing. In that regard, things such as pressure exceedance of maximum allowable operating pressure. We looked at, what we found was that there were, I forget the number, there was maybe 2 occurrences where that happened. It affected piping within the stations, but not within the Straits crossing itself. That was my recollection of that. And a lot of your question gets into regulatory opinion and federal regulations that I don't really feel I can, I would be speculating, I think, if I responded to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if I understand this correctly, I was looking at one of your charts, and it seems like you are relying heavily on using the Kalamazoo oil river spill as a comparable. I'm a layperson, okay? To me, that doesn't seem like a comparable, and again, tail ending on what other people have been talking about. I'm talking about a worst case scenario. Let's face it, if the Kalamazoo River shuts down, not that big of a deal. The Great Lakes shut down, a very big deal. So we're talking not just cleanup costs, court costs, attorney fees, the hit, a major hit on tourism, recreational use, how that would affect Michigan businesses, the fishing industry, okay? So I'm trying to understand why you would even use the Kalamazoo River. We're talking about the Great Lakes. Maybe I'm not understanding the chart. But again, and I don't think it's been really answered, we'd all like to know, it doesn't seem like there is a worst case scenario in your report where the Great Lakes would be shut down or a large part would be shut down. I'm sure when they were, looking at the Deepwater Horizon, they never dreamed that what happened there happened. Okay, so I'm talking, have you really looked at a perfect storm, the worst possible case scenario, and have you drawn figures for that? Because it doesn't seem like the Kalamazoo River would be a comparable.
I think I'm not going to claim that we looked at a perfect storm, but first I'd like to address what I think was a question of how it relates to Kalamazoo and how we relied on Kalamazoo. Actually, we didn't rely on Kalamazoo. For the actual consequence modeling, it was a test of the model. The model inputs include such things as volume, shoreline oiling, type of oil, type of response mechanism, that type of thing. If we applied the same model to Kalamazoo, we were basically testing the model. Kalamazoo is a heavy oil spill. Heavy oil spills cost more to clean up than the light oil spills. Heavy oil, Kalamazoo is about a 20,000 barrel spill. The spills we modeled were smaller than that. Actually, Kalamazoo, because of its larger spill size, benefits somewhat to these economies of scale to which I referred earlier, in fact. But when I do all those comparisons of heavy oil, 20,000 barrels a day, a lot of manual response cleanup in terms of manual removal of oil, those types of conditions generated something using purely all of the statistical data that are in the model on which the model relies on. It actually showed that the model could predict what Kalamazoo cost. So that gave some validation of our model. I'm not saying that it depended on Kalamazoo. Now, getting to your second point of the degree of impact of the lakes, of the Great Lakes, the actual spill cost, which then is informed by the amount of shoreline oiling, by the type of oil, by the oil volume release, and so forth, did generate something like about $200 million in what we saw as among the most costly spills within our set. For perfect storm, there has to be some credibility of that storm. if you will. And what we were modeling was the fate of a worst case technical release, if you will, of about something under 5,000 barrels for the current infrastructure, and coming to conclusions based on that. It is always possible to come up with a case that is somehow worse than the one that you just defined, in fact. And I don't mean to negate the possibilities of that, but I'd like to step back. I'd like to take a step back. That our statement of work was to do a comparison that we can compare like to like for different types of configurations. So when we do a comparison, we might be looking at methods that are using methods that we can compare, if you will, a rail spill to a pipeline spill, and then creating a worst case for all of those is going to be quite a different process that in our professional view would not create a realistic comparison basis for these types of spills as well. So that is one of the issues on the consequences side, certainly.
So I have a question over here, but before I do, if I could clarify, because I think I heard one thing in this lady's question that we might not have gotten to. That $200 million number, I think you mentioned earlier that about a little more than half of it was environmental damage and the other part cleanup costs. When you talk, can you maybe talk a little bit more about what you mean by environmental damage, and does it talk to the damage to fisheries and tourism and the other things that the lady mentioned?
The quick answer is yes. That it does. What we do, and you'll see it in Appendix R of the report, is we use a lot of historical and statistical information to come up with the estimate of environmental damages, and then we do look at the potential contribution of different parts to that. So there's discussion of fisheries, there's discussion of recreation, there's discussion of property values, there's discussion of water supply impacts in terms of providing clean water to people who have had their water intakes fouled, which is a real cost that they then have to deal with. So these are the types of quantifiable damages that can be captured. There are also a host of unquantifiable damages that the report certainly says that we just can't put an economic value to those, and some of those we can't put an economic value to because they are not compensatable. They're not something that you can compensate someone for. Others typically that fall into this realm are certain types of cultural value that economists will say, yes, there is definitely a value to that, but we have no way to monetize that, and there's some discussion of that.
Thank you. So we have a question down here.
I think it's, okay, my main question is why you only studied that short, tiny piece of pipeline. Line 5 runs it's really unfair to all the rest of Michigan. Line 5 runs through 70 different tributaries, and I live in Detroit. It runs upstream, or through the St. Clair Shore River over to Sarnia. If there was a spill there, that would affect the drinking water of all of Detroit and the municipalities that we give water to, and we're already kind of in a water crisis. So I'm trying to understand how the risk analysis was only done on that small piece of pipeline, and how that even sounded okay to do, or like how that even made sense to do. Because the rest of us, that water belongs, it matters to us. The drinking water in Detroit matters. So this needs to be rethought, and you guys can champion that. You can say, hey, we need to look at all of this. It's on your table to do that. We need to look at all that, and that's what's fair. for Michigan and the rest of the people that have to drink the water in Michigan.
So certainly we can say that, this team here, their scope of work was the Straits of Mac, right? I don't know if anyone from the project team wants to speak to how we got there, just very briefly, why that was the focus as opposed to all of line 5.
Yeah, my name is Bob Barker from the Attorney General's Office. I'm part of the project team. The short answer to your question is that, as was explained earlier, this study, the alternatives analysis, was an outgrowth of the Michigan Petroleum Pipeline Task Force report. And I know you've been engaged in this issue. I've assumed that you others here have looked at that. One of the recommendations in that report focus specifically on studies of the Mackinac Straits pipeline, the alternatives analysis and the risk analysis. So, as was pointed out by one of the moderators, that's not really a question to be addressed by them. Their scope of work was driven by the recommendation in the Pipeline Task Force.
They can't champion and ask it that question. That can be on that needs to be on your plate. And it's fair for the rest of Michigan. Right.
So, as everyone keeps saying, we just keep hearing money thrown at what the risk is of this still happening in the Straits. And the main concern that I have is what money cannot pay for. And so what are the animals that would be affected, what wildlife and possible endangered species would be affected if there was a spill in the Straits?
I'm going to start it out, and I'm probably going to pass to you, Jack, perhaps. But very fair question. You're talking about loss of habitat, loss of fish, loss of wildlife, and a lot of the stuff is damaged over the short to mid to long term. And when it comes to doing a quantitative risk assessment, there are ways of quantifying, and there are accepted methods of quantifying certain effects. Economic loss is easily quantified in terms of dollars. Human health and safety loss is by convention quantified in units of fatalities per year of operation of a piece of infrastructure. There is no universally accepted quantifiable unit of measure that fully addresses environmental damage. In no jurisdiction, by no regulator, in no recommended risk practice is there a protocol that does an adequate job of fully quantifying all the environmental and social economic effects that are related to the ecological damage associated with an oil spill. There's just no way of doing that. I may have one perspective on environmental loss that is vastly different than another person's perspective. And that's based on where you live, it's based on culture, it's based on heritage, it's based on whether or not these are your traditional lands or not. And by way of proxy, we used a technique to quantify as best we could those environmental effects. We were tasked with trying to do that, trying to do the unquantifiable. We used dollars as the proxy and the basis for doing that across the board, because ultimately our task was to compare on an apples-to-apples basis the economic risk, the safety risk, and the environmental risk for the current base case against 5 different alternatives. And I don't know, Jack,
Thank you. Yeah, it does fall into a lot of this does fall into the unquantifiable, but there are some methods that can handle that, but they are done post-spill, and a post-spill analysis can can do things like count birds, it can count animals, it can count much more specific habitat loss than a study of a hypothetical spill from a hypothetical leak in an area. That being said, the data upon which these spill costs are based on real data of environmental damages and environmental claims and environmental settlements and cleanup costs and so forth. And sometimes these get mixed together a little bit because the cleanup costs are sometimes paid very immediately for environmental restoration or environmental damage, and they count as cleanup costs, but that's an accounting thing. The actual total costs, which are reflected in the spill cost data, provide a reasonable basis to come up with a first level estimate of the environmental damages that do reflect some of these, what we call natural resource damage costs, which are some form of representation of biota and life and so on these shorelines. But until a spill actually happens, you're not going to get a very precise estimate. So the approach to it that we've taken actually is a very conservative, and I mean in the use of the conservative to use the high level. We have treated this entire zone as what we call a high consequence area. What that does in meaningful dollar terms is that it tends to elevate the cost and the value of environmental damages, in fact. And that's because of the environment, because of its importance, because of its cultural importance, among other things too. So we try to reflect all of those input factors into the model based on spills elsewhere into high consequence areas, which may have done high environmental damage into this particular case too. But it is a forecasting technique, if you will, that we're dealing with, because we're dealing with a hypothetical spill rather than actually having a single spill to look at. We were not looking at a single spill. We were looking at spill sets or mean spills, or even the 95 percentile spill is not a specific set spill. It's a set of spills that is in this realm around the 95th percentile. So we never dealt with a single spill, I guess.
Thank you. So we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Liz Kirkwood. I am interested in two issues. The first one is related to what risk is. As you've indicated, it's an equation mathematically computed by understanding the probability of an event occurring times the consequence or harm. And from your presentation, I understand that the principal threats, the anchor, I'm just going to shorthand this, the anchors, the incorrect operations, and then this weather and outside force, including both the vortex-induced vibration and the spans. These are the primary probability. These have a 1.6% probability of occurring. What concerns me is that, from what I understand, there is no reliable modeling to evaluate or predict in the future when and if these principal threats will occur. Contrary to industry practice to focus on the ILI data, which that's another question, because I don't think the ILI data actually is able to look at external corrosion, and because of the invasive mussels, I'm not clear if Enbridge actually knows whether or not there is external corrosion, any erosion from the weathering and movement of the pipeline. But the question is there a reliable model with predictability that we can evaluate when these threats to happen. And the larger question, what it really begs is this an acceptable risk for the Great Lakes? And I don't think that recommendation or evaluation has been addressed.
Okay, you touched on a few things. I'd like to start out by saying you do have a very good grasp of what risk is, and you've expressed it very well, and I don't want to touch that definition because I would make it not as precise as you did it. So, yeah, well done on that count. With respect to, I think you were talking about, is it possible to predict exactly when something is going to fail? By the very nature of risk, it embodies uncertainty, as you pointed out. And that uncertainty removes the ability to be deterministic with respect to saying definitively, this is the date where we're going to have a failure. We're going to have a failure at 7:10 p.m. on it'll have to be Friday the 13th some year. But we cannot do that. There are no risk techniques that enable us to employ known methodologies and come up with a deterministic failure date of that nature. So we're left with expressing risk as a probability of an event occurring within a given year, that's the failure frequency, multiplied by the consequences. So probability of failure per year of operation times, let's say, dollar impact gives you dollars per year. And those are units of risk, quantified units of risk. And these are probabilities. They're based on probabilities occurring, and they change in the case of time-dependent threats. Those may change over time. They may get bigger. With respect to your question on the inline inspection data and the ability to accurately find external wall loss, I can fully understand why you're asking that question, because after all, the tool is on the inside of the pipe. How can it physically see what's going on the outside of the pipe? And I'll try not to get too technical. The bottom line is it can. It does do a very good job, very reliably of identifying external corrosion wall loss and measuring the size of external corrosion wall loss. It uses very complicated physics to do that. It involves magnetism. And when you saturate a steel wall with magnetism and there is a piece of wall loss through which the magnetism is flowing, that wall loss causes some residual amount of magnetism to escape and be detected. And that signal that's detected gives away where the corrosion is, whether it's the inside surface or the outside surface, and also the size of the corrosion. It's a very well-developed, it's called high-resolution magnetic flux leakage, and it's well-developed technology at this stage. Does a very good job of reliably detecting and sizing both internal corrosion and external corrosion, as well as any cause of wall loss. So, the prospect of possibly erosion-related wall loss, it would pick that up as equally well. Oh, I'm sorry. The third question was acceptable risk. And I have to be very careful here because our terms of reference were very clear. We were to do an analysis, a study, provide information, and give that information to others who would use it to determine acceptability and to determine a correct course of action. And those are the terms of our contract. I cannot offer my own opinion, and I apologize, but that's just the way it is.
Okay, I want to do a little time check-in. It's about 9 o'clock. Actually, it's straight at 9 o'clock. Raise your hand if you have a card. Just want to see what the numbers are. About 8. Okay. We want to get you in and out with your questions answered by 9:30. So I'm going to ask that if you have a question that's not related to the report, that you just bring us the card, and we'll make sure it gets up to our friends here.
but we want to make sure your questions are related to the report, and that they're questions and not statements. And so I have identified 2 people who have, they're very clear that they're ready to go. Right here. So I'm going to turn to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the questions are for Mr. Beef or maybe Mr. Nahel as the project head. 4 very quick related subparts and series. Given the statement in the draft that tribal interests have not yet been fully considered, particularly with respect to the fisheries in the straits, would it be fair to say that the draft may underestimate the costs associated with certain alternatives like the trenching and tunneling that could affect those fisheries?
Just to clarify the question, I think you're describing the facilities application, the actual facilities costs, and is that what you're...
No, what I'm referring to is there's a statement at the very beginning of the draft, part 1, page 9, which says that tribal specific interests, including the cultural, commercial, subsistence interests in fisheries, have not been separately or fully valued and considered. There hasn't been consultation with the tribes, and that the report drafters understand that may be part of the process to come.
That's correct, yes. There is a separate tribal consultation, which is ongoing. I understand that is a process that is parallel to some of these that we're involved with. We have characterized some of the fisheries based on public information in terms of catch and commercial value of that catch, but make we certainly do not pretend to capture the cultural value of that, and that would certainly be something that could be forthcoming from this parallel process.
So then I think this is pretty simple, follows from that pretty simply that the costs associated with certain alternatives that might affect tribal interests in fisheries, those have not yet been fully accounted for.
Those are not necessarily fully accounted for, correct.
And certainly the state has interposed no objection or obstacles to your full consideration of tribal interests as part of this project.
We have had access to tribal land information for purpose of emergency planning. We have embedded what I call a contingency into the high consequence areas. You'll see it captured as an other sensitive area, which increases potential costs of spills. It's a proxy for it. There are potentially cultural values which, as I mentioned earlier, are just not quantifiable under any methods. In fact, that you cannot monetize it. The ones that we addressed were those that can be readily monetized. Fisheries is one of them that we certainly identified. But there are other subsistence uses that there could still be other information that could inform that.
So I guess the bottom line is, can you commit to a full and robust consideration of tribal interests as you enter into the next stages of your final report preparation?
Well, the next final stages of our report preparation, the original scope, if I can back off a minute to that, did not involve use of anything other than anything other than secondary information. We did not have scope to go into primary information gathering, which would have normally included on our part perhaps those types of consultations. So So we did not undertake those consultations ourselves, and I guess I'm not in a position to commit to anything specific unless it was other information that was of a secondary nature that may have been collected.
We have a question down here.
All right, my question is about why you dismiss alternative 2 as not being feasible. And I guess I'm wondering why you didn't look at the broader context. We know that in 2013, the Enbridge system of oil that includes both Line 6B and Line 5 was increased by more than 300,000 barrels per day. So when you stated that you're looking at the 540,000 barrel per day volume today in Line 5 as what you're looking at for your alternatives, but they just recently added 300,000 barrels a day of oil, just as much as 4 years ago. They're taking that extra oil and they're shipping it through the Great Lakes and taking it to the East Coast for export. Clearly, we don't need all that oil, yet you dismissed that as being, not a viable alternative. I'd really like you to speak to why you didn't look at the broader context of what they're doing with this oil and sending it to the East Coast for export. We're getting the short end of the stick here at the Great Lakes while they're making profits exporting oil.
To go back to alternative 2, we basically looked at the current utilization of existing infrastructure, and that would have included the southern lines within the Lakehead system, which is now typically characterized as line 78. We did find excess capacity in part of that line 78, and I think that's what Mr. Miles spoke of earlier. But if you do consider that to actually use it, you would need to build infrastructure that was equivalent to basically a new pipeline, a new 2 billion pipeline to patch into that, if you will. The bottom line is that the existing infrastructure is full. That includes line 5, the new line 78, everything else within the Lakehead system. You'll see that we refer to a system of 2.6 million barrels a day, which is largely the capacity of the Lakehead system, and deliveries to the Sarnia area are just over a million, and some of that does keep going east. So it's moving into markets in eastern Canada and into the eastern United States. Our scope, again, was to compare alternatives within this and not to start looking so much at the market demand and what is creating the demand for that oil, whether it's in eastern Canada or the eastern United States, in New York State, for example. So it is going there.
I think, did we not answer your question? Are you good?
Wait, could you clarify 2.6 million barrels a day travels from where to where? Is this the Great Lakes?
That is through the Lakehead what's called the Lakehead system.
Enbridge, just Enbridge?
That is the Enbridge Energy Limited Partnership throughput.
So let's stay with the questions that Tracy and I had going. So I have the next one.
Thank you. Okay, so the report presumes risk management and effective delivery of liquid and natural gas products is upon objective, and the report solicited by...
We can't hear that.
Okay. Let's start again. The report presumes that risk management and cost-effective delivery of liquid and natural gas products is upon objective. The report solicited by and submitted to the DEQ and the Michigan Agency for Energy appears to be asking and answering the wrong questions. There's a superficial consideration of pipeline abandonment, alternative number 6, but there's no analysis of development of the replacement alternative infrastructure to deliver and provide long-term maintenance of alternative sustainable energy Line 5 dirty fuels as sustainable energy sources in terms of energy needs, emerging energy technologies, jobs, economic development, and quality of life for the state and the people of Michigan. Now, this is perhaps a question for the DEQ, and I was told DEQ would answer questions also. The panel clearly did not address this in their report. So if analysis of full consideration of this alternative, number 6, has not been assessed to date, will and when will it be appropriately and thoroughly considered?
I thought you were going to actually take that. We have a very tightly prescribed scope of work, and what you've described, the linking of alternative 6 to renewable energy and revamping the economy to run on renewable energy in lieu of oil was not within that defined scope of work. We can only speak to the scope of work that we were doing. This is why I was waiting, because we were told only to respond to 2 questions that pertain to our scope of work.
So we have a question down here.
Okay. Deb Hansen. I am making the assumption that all pipeline owner-operators will have a backup plan for any line in their network. Do you know what the backup plan for Enbridge is if line 5 fails for any length of time?
By failure, I assume that you mean that it can't be operated for whatever reason. Within the Lakehead system, there is a protocol, and this is typical of oil shipments to final markets. There's a protocol of what's called apportionment. If for one reason part of the pipeline is not available, then existing capacity within the system is apportioned to users downstream. And the users downstream, in this case, to take a hypothetical, and it's actually described in the report under the abandonment assumption, is that the Detroit and Toledo refineries would not have access to a certain amount of oil, but they would still have access to some of the oil through the southern parts of the Lakehead system. And it's given to them based on an apportionment based on their refinery capacity. So it's not really a backup plan, it's just the way the system would respond in the very short term. And what happens in that particular case, and this is described in the report, is that the Detroit and Toledo refinery complex would have less oil through the Lakehead system. It would revert to oil that's coming from the southern United States through the Mid-Valley pipeline system, so that they still have oil to produce gasoline. But that switch to the Mid-Valley means that they are also going to be paying somewhat higher prices. In one scenario that's described, the Toledo refinery complex would actually have to go to some rail deliveries of a few tens of thousands of barrels a day. The Marathon refinery would still look for Lewiston production, but pay about an extra $2.40 a barrel to get it there. So, and these are all the parts of the arithmetic that get bundled together and create this scenario that we've seen the bottom line of, that it's 2 cents, it works out to 2 cents a gallon and 5.7 billion barrels of gasoline during the year. So that is, I don't characterize that as a backup plan. That is basically what would happen if suddenly there was an interruption in the flow, for whatever reason, that line 5 could not deliver that. Apart from that, I'm not aware of any specific operator protocols that Lakehead might have, but that is how the current contractual systems would work.
No, I'm in agreement with the gentleman that spoke about line 6B not being used. Everything that we're talking about here is how do we keep Canadian oil coming from Canada and going to Canada running through? The people of Michigan don't want Enbridge's line running through the Straits of Mackinac. They don't want it running through the 540 miles of Michigan. Why cannot, and it's already said, you know, the two big things are, the price of gas is going up, and the propane in the UP will be gone. They already said, it's already improving. 2 tanker loads a day would take care of the UP gas, and we could just ship the Lewiston gas straight to the refineries in Detroit. It's 540,000 barrels times, okay, just let me just do these numbers first. 540,000 times 95% that's going to Sarnia, that's 22,000. 16,000 comes out of Lewiston, got 6,000 more. Those refineries in Detroit can get their 6,000 from other places. Why isn't that a viable option? Why is everything have to be, we gotta keep the Enbridge pipeline running?
So it's really not a question for you, because it's not really what you were asked to analyze. Well, it could be an option, but it's not the alternative. Okay, we can consider that. If you have it on your chart, okay, I'll make sure you have it.
Isn't that an alternative?
Yeah, but it doesn't have anything to do with what their report is on, and that's what our questions are supposed to be limited to.
Well,
And one of their alternatives was abandonment of line 5. So we're going to try to wrap up. I've got a couple of questions over here on this side.
Let's be honest, this is an economic decision that's trying to be made. They can save $5 billion when they continue running oil through the streets. But they also have, the benefit is, they say, well, we'll get a few jobs that'll last for a few years. But the real consequence is the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes is the largest freshwater body of water in the world. And you can see already states in Arizona, California, they're running out of water. They're going to Canada. And and you've used your big data to say, well, minimize this. The bottom line is that we had the rising debacle in the Gulf of Mexico, and we've had the Enbridge debacle right here in Michigan. So if something goes wrong, there was a gentleman who's left who worked at apparently University of Michigan. He says that your studies on the currents vary. This has got a real serious consequence. One thing we've learned in Michigan through the Flint debacle is that a few bucks saved for a corporation or a few jobs can destroy the resource base. And I want you to start looking at, instead of saying, well, it's got a 97% chance, start looking at the Great Lakes as if it's a unique body.
So I think we did hear from Joe, or maybe it was from Joe, I'm sorry, my eyesight's as bad as yours, that a lot of, part of the natural resource damage assessment was that we did consider this, what did you call it, a high consequence area, right? That was part of the analysis. Do you have, I appreciate your passion on the issue, sir, but do you have a question that you think our panel can address?
If it really, it cost Enbridge $1 billion, I read in the paper today, to fix the place in Battle Creek. So what's it going to cost them if something goes bad at the Straits? And two, if they go bankrupt, who pays for it?
So I think you did address the cost of a spill earlier. So I think that question's been asked and answered. And whether or not Enbridge goes bankrupt would definitely be a question for our Attorney General's office if something along that line would occur. You're up.
that way. Hi guys, how are you? Hell of a job you have to go through. I'm Brad Callio. My title is a solutionist. I run the Zynoc Foundation, and I develop renewable energy technology and solutions to impossible problems caused by other people. Einstein quoted once that the problems of today cannot be solved with the same level of thinking that created them. And one of the things that I noticed that wasn't brought up in your questions was earthquakes. Yeah. Now, earthquakes right now are caused by fracking. There are over 60,000 holes in the state of Michigan plus already. And we've had some earthquakes recently in the past couple of years caused by fracking. They've already been documented. One of them was in Battle Creek, and that was a shallow earthquake. Those kind of things are going to become more common as we continue to keep digging more holes in the earth, let alone the climate change and a few other things. Is that addressed in your analysis? Was that allowed to be addressed in your analysis? Because I know how analysis work at college. They give you a certain level of parameters to work with, and that's what you're supposed to work with. So, oh, and one other thing. Do you have a pencil? Everybody write this word down for me. Hold up a pencil. Write the word thrive. Write the word thrive down. Because as a species, we're supposed to thrive, not just survive. And has everybody here seen that movie? How many people here, raise your hand, seen that movie, Thrive? Okay, well, there's your homework for tonight. Anyway, have you addressed the question of earthquakes?
Thanks for the question. I get to speak. Yes, we did address the question. It's one of the several of the geohazard items that we went through. So, Jim said earlier, one of the external threats, and one class of that is geohazards. One of the many different types of geohazards, such as spanning, such as underwater landslides. It takes volcanism and it takes earthquakes, among other things. So there was a review of the tectonic activity. Happens to be, you're not wrong that there is shallow earthquakes and there is small earthquakes in this part of the world. It takes very, very large earthquakes generally to cause damage to well-distilled pipeline systems. The magnitudes and the earthquake occurrence numbers that are here and the data that we've gone through, and there's a fairly extensive write-up in the report in the appendix, would suggest that there is no risk of damage to the pipeline due to earthquakes. They typically get quite high, and it's dependent on the soil type.
Is there a number?
No, there's not one number. It's a spectrum, and the spectrum is that you could have very soft soils and low shaking and amplifying ground movements, similar to things you see on maybe the West Coast, versus stiffer ground conditions. You need different seismic source from different levels. So it's a broad spectrum, and I think we've talked about that in lots of our analysis, and we sort of take the view of all possible outcomes and the scenarios, but typically we look at the chance of exceedance of a 1 in 2475 year earthquake, and Michigan plots in the lowest of the United States in terms of seismic risk. Yep, no, it's in the report, so.
Well, numbers aren't.
So we've got one more question up here.
Hi, my question piggybacks off of a couple of previously asked about option 2, and I'm curious on the word capacity. What is that definition? Are you using design capacity, and how much of that evaluation factors in Enbridge's long-term plan? I started to read a little bit of that section just now, just to clarify for myself, and I think that I have that answer, but I just want to hear you all say it. And then the other point for option 2 I want to ask is why did you only look at the full capacity of line 5 and not break it out to what is being used within the state of Michigan?
Okay, I'll answer the first one, which I understand to be was it the design capacity? And basically, yes. It included the design of the of line 5, of line 78, of the entire part of the system. So when I mentioned 2.6 million barrels, that's basically the design capacity. And there is some operating history around that. The system, Enbridge in its last annual report reported that it was actually operating parts of the system at somewhat higher than design capacity, which was possible operationally, actually, because of the product that goes through it and how it operates. But generally, the assumption was design capacity for pipes and the nameplate design capacity for refineries. That's basically background for the operation. Now, could you repeat your second question or remind me of it, please?
Yeah, you were only looking at the total capacity of line 5 and translating that to other pipeline systems. You were not looking at just Michigan needs, which I think was the intent, or at least that's what the public may have perceived the intent to be for option 2, is for it to look at what are the Michigan needs of line 5 and can that be met on other pipeline systems. And I'll preface that by saying that I don't think we should be managing Enbridge's product for them, but I think it's worth noting that that the report did not break out the 2 different quantities.
Okay, I'm going to break your question into 3 different parts because one part is the 540,000 barrels a day that goes from Superior to the Marysville, Sarnia area, and that was not broken out between Michigan requirements. It's basically what can substitute that system. That's basically our scope of work. Now, in addition to that scope of work, or as part of that scope of work, there was also the case of the deliveries, the net deliveries to Rapid River, which was for the natural gas liquids, and there is an entire appendix dedicated to that, which shows the backstop for propane delivery. And there was the injection at Lewiston, which was also just for that. And there were some engineering things that were done around that too, and Mr. Mile spoke to those of requiring a 4-inch pipeline for the Upper Peninsula and an 8-inch pipeline, but those are really difficult to monitor and to run, and so we looked at other backstop technologies, but we did not specifically break out those volumes of what's needed for Michigan, and it's partially because this entire lakehead system is capable of bringing some volumes from Superior to the Detroit refineries through either the southern run or through the line 5 run. So through the calculations of apportionment, there is no way to predict which stream is going to go via line 5 or via line 6A and eventually some of the southern part of the system. So that was not part of our scope of work to break out that part into Michigan or to try to run the pipeline at just those volumes for the volumes of Michigan, which would have been a reduced volume, I guess, because some of it does go to say the Detroit refinery complex, but even then contractually there would be issues with that, so it's not something that was considered.
As a former resident of the Kalamazoo River, we need to include human cost into those other intangible things. My question, though, is on tankers. If we open up the SUE to allow super tankers in, how will that affect the straits and the possibility of ruptures to a pipeline? We
didn't go that far in our screening. Mr. Mile described the screening, so we did not look at that particular way of doing it, so I can't really speculate on that. What we did cover, and is described in the report, is a system of what we call articulated tanker barges, and the system that is required for that would not actually require opening up the Sioux locks. It would require building a whole bunch of storage at each end and having these barges run through that lock system when they were open. And that is something that is actually technically a possibility, but there are so many other logistical issues with it that we screened it out. And what you're describing would be yet another step beyond that, and I can't speculate what the outcome of that screening might have been.
So we have another question up here.
Hi, my question is more of a clarification. In your report, you said that there are no holidays based on federal standards, but Enbridge reported to the state of Michigan 40 holidays in the straight section of the pipeline. So I'm wondering what the difference between the federal standards are and state standards, and what the average size of the holidays are within the straight pipeline.
You're speaking about coding holidays or gaps in coding. But you were also incorporating a question regarding federal standards and state standards that I didn't catch.
On the, in your presentation, you said there are no holidays on the pipelines based on federal standards, but Enbridge said today, I'm sorry, did you not say that?
Okay, so what I did say is the best evidence, in my opinion, for the condition of the coding comes from the CPCM tool, the Cathodic Protection Current Mapper tool, which identifies not only locations of holidays, but the direction of current flow at those locations of holidays. There were no anomalies in either the east or west pipelines that would indicate holidays in that tool data set. And furthermore, you would also expect to see if there was significant wall loss. Typically, you should also expect to see, if there is significant coating damage and holidays, you should also typically see wall loss going along with that. And we did not see any external corrosion related wall loss through the straight segments.
Okay. That's your question? Because it seemed like you had something about what maybe was reported elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm just curious because Enbridge did report to the state that there are holidays on the straight.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. I think that was with respect to the zebra mussel investigation. And I think I know which report you're referring to. And they were asked as part of a consent decree settlement, I believe, to develop a work plan that would involve investigating further the presence of zebra mussels and the effects of those zebra mussels on the integrity of the pipeline. And as part of their mandate, they were instructed to look for any evidence of holidays and to develop plans for investigations around those holidays. So in their work plan document, they talked about holidays and their plans for investigations around holidays. This work plan is a plan. It doesn't describe work that has been done, but it is a plan around what you will do, what sorts of investigations you will do at any locations of holidays as per their instructions. So that's where their reference to holidays came in. They subsequently clarified that they understood that this created a perception that there were holidays in the coding in the straits segments, and that what they were referring to were the potential for holidays as directed in the decree. However, their position was that there was no evidence of holidays in actual fact. Yeah, so that was part of the concern because there's underwater UAV vehicle footage that depicts what appear to be some sort of spalling off of some sort of coating. What you need to understand about the coal tar enamel coating system is that there is a corrosion coating made of coal tar enamel, over top of which there is an asbestos felt outer wrap. They are not in intimate contact with one another. The outer wrap is there primarily to hold the gooey, hot, molten coal tar enamel in place during the coating process. It holds everything in place, prevents it from dripping off, and it also helps shield it from ultraviolet degradation when it's being stored above ground. However, that outer wrap, in my fairly extensive experience in doing integrity digs on vintage pipelines that are coated with this stuff, is that outer wrap is very prone to disbond and fall off. And it's not uncommon at all. For instance, when you're excavating on an integrity dig, the last excavator load or shovel load that is knocked off the pipe brings with it the outer wrap. The coating then is still intact underneath that outer wrap. And so I believe what you're probably seeing in that footage is the outer wrap.
Okay, we have a question here.
You mentioned all these inline studies that have been done and the data and all that collected, but I'm wondering, did you people yourselves actually do a visual inspection of this? Because I saw online a video called the 3-minute tour of the pipeline under the straits or whatever it was, and you mentioned that it's laying on the bottom. It's not laying on the bottom. It shows that there's like several stretches, 200 and some feet long, that are not supported or very poorly supported. I mean, where does the vortex vibration stuff all come in that area where there's all this extended area that's not supported? And as for seismic activity in Michigan, I understand the Niagara Escarpment was formed by volcanoes. And we have a lot of tremors in the United States. They might not be big ones that everybody's making news about, but I lived in Indonesia where there were tremors all the time, and we had an earthquake of 8 point something. So I know tremors and earthquakes. I slept on a cot. I feel earthquakes at my house. I can watch the water in my glass shimmer. And I've had them wake me up. Probably wouldn't wake you guys up, but I've had them wake me up because I'm so used to them having lived in Indonesia 6 months.
So I think the question is related to the spans.
Yeah. And so just to clarify, we did not do any direct data collection. We did not do any field data collection as part of our scope of work, because I think that was part of your question. Did we do direct field data collection? No, we did not. Part of that data collection, however, that we did rely on was the span inspection reports. And
the reports you guys did though, or did, I mean,
so again, we did not. There are numerous span inspection reports dating back to 2005, going up to 2016 that we were given, and that's the information on which we based they were Enbridge's inspection reports. So again, we did not do direct data collection. And this is a question that came up earlier. How do you verify that every span they're reporting in their span inspection reports were present? They didn't miss any. They were all recorded as the right length. We weren't swimming around behind them, verifying, looking over their shoulders. We had to rely on the data we were given. But you're correct. When we say that it's lying on the bottom, that's nominally lying on the bottom through the deep water channel portion of the crossing. It's nominally lying on the bottom. However, that being said, that is only nominally, and as a matter of fact, there are numerous spans which have been monitored on not exactly an annual basis since 2005. There are some years that they haven't done the inspections. But it's interesting that you can track every span. What they've done is they've identified every span, they've given it a span identifier number. They measure that same span year after year after year after year. And it's actually a pretty rigorous data set. It was useful for our analysis. I personally didn't have any reason to doubt that it contained falsified records.
Are they reporting any extra long spans?
Yes, absolutely. Some of those span lengths that they reported were over 130 feet.
But aren't they required by their contract to support it every 75 feet or something like that?
That's part of their easement agreement.
So they're not keeping up their agreement?
You and I can talk about that later, okay? So it's a totally different topic than what these guys were charged with doing. Tracy has the final question of the night.
There's something related to, you had a question regarding.
So maybe I can add a few more numbers to it. So in the report, we will state that the seismic risk and the potential for seismic shaking anywhere on the Earth is not zero. Earthquakes can occur. We talk about living in Indonesia. It's on the Ring of Fire. 90% of all earthquakes occur on the Ring of Fire, and it rings the Pacific Ocean, and it dominates the world's seismic activity. In no way do I suggest that there's not potential for seismic. So for a geohazard, for an impact to the pipeline, not only does seismic shaking have to occur, something then has to either be triggered as a result of gravity movement, or structurally something has to not be able to withstand the actual shaking for something to occur, or thirdly, you have a fault displacement. So we looked at things like the active fault database record. There is none in terms of the active faulting. Jurisdictions on the western side of the country keep very accurate records of this. Pipelines crossing in Alaska. These are tracked, and there's databases where we can go to this. So we did review the database to check whether there's active faulting. That would obviously have some relevance.
Was Haiti on the earthquake radar? Because I also
Yep. Haiti lies on a plate boundary in the Caribbean plate. It's a very highly active seismic zone. So what we do is it's well presented in the report, but there is a the Niagara escarpment. As you get into the east and south, there is seismic activity zones, and there's maps that are published that define the potential for ground shaking, so peak ground accelerations. In the case of a 1 in 2475 year, one chance in 2,475 year chance of occurrence for the continental United States. And so we're in a zone where we're under the threshold of 0.04 G. So that's expressed as 4% of the acceleration due to gravity. So without diving into the details, it's a very, very low number for ground accelerations. And so that drops off the threshold of things that we don't suggest that there's not a potential for shaking, but the shaking is so low, you can feel it. I think you suggested you can feel it, others maybe can't. When the shaking is down in those realms, we actually have to instigate something to cause a failure, and so that's why that threat assessment drops off to 0 and others dominate, like span. So hopefully that covers some more on that seismic discussion.
Thanks for that clarification. We have one more question over here.
Thank you for your endurance here. I think my question or comment is more for the state of Michigan. I shared Jim Lively was the gentleman sitting here, and he expressed his disappointment about the lack of capacity on the current network for alternative 2. I would share that, and I don't know if during this public comment period there will be an opportunity for the state of Michigan to revise the scope at all. For me, there are some significant ethical problems with perhaps the risk of our survival as a species. We know that Line 9 was reversed in flow several years ago. We know that line 78 was doubled in capacity 5 years ago, something like that. So that we have no, we can have no management on who this oil is serving. We've talked a lot about energy independence, so my question is mainly to the state of Michigan. I think this is a big hole in the scope of this effort, is who is this capacity serving, and the amount of risk that's being taken not only in Michigan on line 5, but the entire Great Lakes Basin through this. We need to know where that oil is headed and how that is going to be managed. So that really, I don't know if anybody is here from the state who can respond to that, but for me that is really a very critical hole in the scope of that.
Thank you. And I think that is outside the bounds of what our panel can address. And I do appreciate the endurance not only of our panel, but obviously of our attendees. I know many of you traveled a distance to be here. But I will just remind those of you that are still with us that there are going to be these public feedback sessions, right? So this was an opportunity for you to just, put our experts through the ringer, right? We paid these guys, they're here to answer all of your technical questions, but I understand that a lot of you have thoughts and comments that go beyond the scope of just what they can answer tonight. So please remember that, we do have these public feedback sessions, one right here, one in Traverse City, and one up in St. Ignace. You can make your comments online as well. So please attend those and make your comments for the record at that time.
Great. When's the one here again?
July 24th. And then later that evening in Traverse City, and then the next evening in St. Ignace. We thank you for coming. Please drive safely home. You can still submit comments and questions online for quite a long time now, so please make sure you utilize the webpage. The report is up online, and this presentation will be up here shortly too. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I saw